Hello retro gamers and welcome to a new series for Retro Game On called Unreleased and Unobtainable. In Unreleased and Unobtainable, I'll be checking out games that would likely be impossible to play otherwise by using a Raspberry Pi loaded with the RetroPie emulation OS. These could be games that never saw the light of day but are in a playable state, or games that are so rare and sought after that myself and my peasant salary could never afford to purchase. Today's video focuses on the latter as I check out Air Raid for the Atari 2600, widely considered to be the 2600's rarest game. Throughout the video I'll explain why it's rare, how it plays, and as a bonus I'll be discussing its seemingly mysterious developer, Menavision, which previously not a lot was known about. Air Raid was released in 1982 and was both developed and published by Menavision. Being an early 80s game on the 2600, the concept isn't overly complicated. Based in Manhattan, enemy bombers are attacking, and it's your duty to take them out and save your beloved city. If they reduce 12 skyscrapers to pitiful rubble, however, then it's game over. The cartridge itself is also quite unique since for one, it's blue, and two, it has what's known as a T handle on the top. This was probably to aid in pulling it out of the console, but also gave it a distinct look. So, we're 3 paragraphs in, and you're probably wondering why Air Raid is so rare. Menavision wasn't exactly a big name when it came to 80s developers. In fact, Air Raid was their only game and had a very limited run. It appears that only 13 to 20 copies exist worldwide, and only 3 of those were boxed, with only 1 being in complete condition. Although we'll get into those shortly. The cartridges by themselves can go for over $3,000, which is insanity in itself, but it's when we get to the box versions that we enter brand new Mazda territory. The first copy for sale of its box was in 2010, and that sold for a staggering $31,600. And remember folks, this is a video game, a 2600 game no less. However, the most interesting story associated with the sale occurred in the October of 2012 by a Harv Bennett. This included the box and cartridge, but most importantly the instruction manual, which was the first ever seen in modern times. Although sadly, I could not find a scan of this online, only photos. During the 80s, Bennett was an assistant manager in a drugstore that sold games of all things. And quick side note, is that common in the States? All my locals only sell overpriced band-aids besides from the necessary meds. Anyway, he dealt with the various reps that were trying to flog their games. One such guy was of course representing Menavision, and he was trying to sell Air Raid. Bennett took home a sample to test and thought it was a bit crap. Not wanting to sell a decidedly average game, he rang the rep letting him know as such. Bennett told the rep to pick it up next time he was around, but the rep seemed to be fed up with Air Raid since he wasn't having any luck with it and said he could keep it. Bet he's regretting that now. So Bennett bought it from the drugstore for a few bucks and had it in his collection until he finally did sell it on Game Gavel for $33,433. Not a bad profit even if there was a 30-year gap. There's several cool videos online showing him pulling it out of his collection and then testing it. Links can be found in the description box. Riding on the success of that and the attached media attention, the third known box copy, although this time again without a manual, allegedly sold for just shy of $14,000 in the October of the same year. I should add that there was no verification that this was actually paid out, however, and the fact that it was so low compared to the other 2 complete box auctions should be a cause of suspicion also. Regardless, the finding of its box and manual led to knowing more about Menavision. But first, let's check out the actual game itself. You might be wondering why the screen goes black and white sometimes. This is not on purpose, but happens because the scanline count isn't completely compatible with NTSC. It's actually more closer to PAL, being 290 scanlines, which is why the emulator likely gets a bit confused from time to time. Why this is the case is unknown, but is likely just because it was programmed poorly and is badly optimized. What we do know, however, is that Air Raid is a hack of Space Jockey, which was originally released by US Games. Again, no one knows why Space Jockey particularly, but it can be assumed because it was cheap and easy to obtain. As you've probably guessed, Air Raid isn't sought after and rare because it's an excellent game. While not terrible, it's definitely nothing special. You scroll from left to right taking out the intruders, and you have 3 lives. But of course, the game only allows 12 buildings to be leveled before it's game over. Aside from there being 8 different modes which alter the difficulty, that's it. The only real defining part of the gameplay is that the combat is in fairly close quarters. It can be a bit surprising at first with the enemies being so close, however you can't collide with them anyway, so it just means you have a short window of opportunity from stopping them destroying a building. The graphics and sound are functional, I guess, although it's unfair to judge these since it was a 2600 game after all. With just about everything else discussed, let's turn our attention to Menavision. Their origins were quite mysterious when we only had the cartridges, but this all changed with the discovery of the boxes. Printed on the back it says, "Printed and made in Taiwan, 1982, Menavision LA, California." This was handy as we now knew the date and the location of manufacturing, but most importantly, that it was developed in LA. However, it wasn't until we saw the instruction manual that we finally got an address. 1702 Sunset Boulevard. Tapping that into Google Street View reveals the Jensen Recreation Center, which is actually quite a well-known building in the area thanks to its vintage electric sign. It also once had a bowling alley, although sadly that's long gone. Looking at the Jensen Recreation Center in the present doesn't really tell us much, so handily, here's a photo of it in the 80s. See the names of the shop fronts? There's Mena Jewelry, Mena Sporting Goods, and lastly at 1702, Mena Toys. Is Mena Vision a play on words of Mena? Surely that's not a coincidence. It was all heresy until 2012, when a sort of Atari Age forum member found a forum post from 2008 on a website about Echo Park, which is where the store was located. The original poster and his family were Cuban immigrants, and he claimed that his father was the co-owner of Mena Jewelry as well as Mena Toys, and is named as such because Mena was their surname. Unfortunately, the OP never replied to questions added a few years later asking about the game, but another breakthrough happened in a thread back on Atari Age titled The Secrets of Mena Vision Revealed. This was actually pointing back to the thread where the Echo Park forum was originally found, although this thread became important in itself. Started in 2012, it went for just 10 pages and 226 posts, yet the last time it was bumped was in the October of 2016. The excitement started early 2013 when a forum member, who was also Colombian, claimed that his dad knew the owner of Mena Toys. He was working on a full report about the subject and even stated that he'd interviewed someone who'd once worked there, although sadly his last post in the thread was in the October of 2013 and hasn't been heard from since. So later on in this thread, about May 2015 to be exact, that things got really interesting. User J Mena Jr. 23 started contributing, and over 10 points revealed quite a bit. Now living in Florida, he grew up in Echo Park and claimed that his father and uncle who owned Mena Toys and that his grandfather owned Mena Jewelry. He was insistent on the fact that he was only a toddler during this time period and didn't remember anything personally, but knew from family conversations over the years that the game was programmed by a family friend named Tony. According to his cousin, they even played the game in the back office of Mena Toys back in the 80s, although he had no personal recollection. Ultimately, he said that he would be in contact with his father, who was also in Florida, and the rest of his family from that time period in LA, but sadly his post stopped in May 2015 with no further information. Whether this is all true or not is anyone's guess, but it's safe to assume that someone would not go to great lengths to fool a bunch of Atari enthusiasts. Besides, the information is plausible in my opinion. The location, the story, the people involved, there's no glaring holes in the information that indicates that it's false. Sure, there is more that I'd like to know. For instance, who was Tony the programmer, and how many copies exactly were sold? Hope that someday we'll know for sure, but for now, we can be guaranteed that Air Raid is a game with an interesting backstory and is most definitely unobtainable to the common folk.